What if your life depended on a single letter? What if the words you wrote could either save your family or send you to the executioner's block? For a queen, this was not a hypothetical question. It was a daily reality. How do you plead for help when your jailer reads every word? How do you plot an escape when spies are disguised as your closest servants? You turn words into weapons. You create a secret language hidden in plain sight. You hope the person on the other end can understand your coded message. And you pray the wrong person does not break it first. Number 19, could a simple shape hold the key to a kingdom? A child's game of tic-tac-toe could be used to condemn a man to death. A simple grid of lines, something you might scratch in the dirt with a stick, formed the basis of a powerful cipher. The Knights Templar, a wealthy and powerful military order, were said to use a version of this cipher to protect their secret centuries before any queen adopted it. Their vast network and immense wealth made them a target, so secrecy was paramount. The cipher's strength was its simplicity. It was easy to learn and quick to use. This code is often called the pigpen cipher. It works by drawing two grids. One is a standard tic-tac-toe grid. The other is an X shape. You then place letters of the alphabet into the spaces created by the lines. For the first grid, 2 letters go into each of the 9 boxes. The first letter is represented by the shape of the box it's in. The second letter is represented by the same shape, but with a dot inside. For the X grid, letters are placed in the 4 triangular spaces and the 4 outer V shapes. Again, a dot distinguishes the second letter in each space from the first. To write a coded message, you just draw the shape of the box or angle that contains your desired letter. A U shape would represent the letter A. A U shape with a dot in it would be B. A square would be G. And a square with a dot would be H. The recipient of the message only needed to have the same key, the same 2 grids drawn on a scrap of paper to translate the strange collection of angles and dots back into words. Some queens, particularly those with less formal training in complex cryptography, found this method appealing. It did not require mathematical skill or large code books. It was a visual system. A queen could teach it to a trusted lady in waiting in minutes. You know, they could practice it by drawing shapes in embroidery patterns or even by tracing them on a dusty windowsill. It was a code that could be taught and memorized without leaving a trail of evidence. The problem was its simplicity. While easy to use, it was also easy to recognize. Anyone familiar with basic ciphers would see a collection of geometric shapes and immediately suspect a pigpen cipher. It worked on a simple substitution principle. Each letter was always replaced by the exact same symbol. A cryptanalyst, a codebreaker, could use frequency analysis to break it. In the English language, the letter E is the most common. A codebreaker would simply count the symbols in the secret message. The most frequent symbol was almost certainly the replacement for E. The next most common would be T, then A, and so on. A queen using this cipher was taking a huge risk. She was betting that her enemies were unsophisticated. She was hoping her letter would not fall into the hands of a professional. For quick, low-stakes messages, it might have been enough. A note to a confederate confirming a meeting time. A secret instruction to a servant. But for matters of state, for plots and conspiracies, relying on the pigpen cipher was like building a fortress out of wood. It looked secure to the untrained eye, but a single spark of knowledge could bring the whole thing down. It provided a false sense of security, which, in the world of royal intrigue, was more dangerous than no security at all. Number 18. Can a flower betray a queen? A bouquet of flowers could order an army to attack. The color of a rose, once a simple matter of beauty, could sign a death warrant. For centuries, people have assigned meanings to flowers, but in the courts of Europe, this practice was refined into a secret language. This language, sometimes called floriography, was a powerful tool for women, especially queens, who were often watched constantly. Their every word was noted, their every letter intercepted, but who would suspect a simple floral arrangement? A red rose might mean passionate love in public, but in a prearranged code between a queen and her general, it could mean strike now. A yellow carnation, a symbol of disdain, could be a warning that a traitor was in their midst. The number of flowers held meaning. The way they were arranged held meaning. Even the hand that presented them could change the message entirely. A bouquet received with the right hand might accept a proposal. The same bouquet received with the left hand might reject it. This was a code of pure subtlety. It left no written evidence. A queen could walk through her garden with an ambassador, point to a specific flower, and convey a complex political message without speaking a single incriminating word. She could send a lady in waiting to a market to buy a specific combination of herbs and flowers, seemingly for decoration or medicine, but in reality she was sending a detailed instruction to a spy. The system was complex. Dictionaries were published listing the meanings of flowers, but these were often for public consumption, for lovers and poets. The real codes were private. A queen and her confidant would create their own secret dictionary. To them, a lily might not mean purity, it might mean the treasury is empty. A sprig of rosemary might not be for remembrance. It could be a code for a specific person, Lord Essex. This made the code incredibly difficult to break. An enemy spy could capture the bouquet, consult every known flower dictionary, and still have no idea what the true message was. The weakness of the flower code was its limited vocabulary. It was good for short, urgent messages.
Yes.
No, wait, danger. But it was difficult to communicate intricate plans or detailed intelligence. A plot to overthrow a rival could not be fully explained with daisies and lavender. It relied on the context of an ongoing conversation. The flower code was often a supplement to other forms of communication, a way to add a secret layer to a public interaction. Imagine a queen at a public banquet. She feels a chill and asks for a shawl. A servant brings one, and pinned to it is a small sprig of ivy, which they had coded to mean be careful. But the queen now knows someone in the room is a threat. Later, a courtier presents her with a single white rose, their secret signal for I have news. The queen subtly adjusts a ring on her finger, their sign for we will speak later. In this silent, tense ballet, an entire conversation has taken place, invisible to everyone else in the room. This was the world where a flower was never just a flower. Number 17, did a queen's prayer book hide a secret war? A prayer book, a symbol of piety and devotion, was one of the most effective tools for espionage. Queens were expected to be devout. No one would question a queen spending hours with her book of hours or her personal psalter. Her guards in attendance would see a woman at prayer, a comforting and normal sight. They would not see a spy master at work. The codes hidden in prayer books were varied and ingenious. One of the simplest methods was the book cipher. The queen and her correspondent would both have identical copies of the same book. It had to be the exact same edition, with the same page layout and a specific printing. A code would be a series of numbers. For example, the code 112.4.3 would mean go to page 112, find the fourth line, and the third word on that line is the message. A series of these numbers would spell out a complete sentence. 112.4388.1.7 215.91. The message would be enemy arrives Tuesday. This method was incredibly secure. If the coded message was intercepted, it was just a meaningless string of numbers. Without the key, which was the book itself, the message was gibberish, and who would suspect a prayer book? It was the last place an enemy would look for a code book. A queen could have dozens of books in her chambers. An enemy would have to know exactly which book, which edition, and which printing was being used. Another method was to use pinpricks. A queen could use a fine needle to make tiny, almost invisible pricks above or below certain letters in the text. Over the course of a chapter, these pinpricked letters would spell out a secret message. She could then send the entire book to her co-conspirator. To the casual observer, it was just a gift, a devotional item passed from one pious individual to another. But the recipient would know to hold the pages up to the light and look for the tiny holes that spelled out a plot. Invisible ink was also used within the pages of books. The wide, empty margins of a prayer book were the perfect canvas. A queen could use lemon juice or milk to write a secret message between the printed lines of a psalm. The writing would be invisible until the page was gently heated over a candle flame, causing the secret text to darken and appear. If captured, the book would appear completely normal. The incriminating words were lurking there, waiting for a little heat to bring them to life. The psychological advantage of using a prayer book was immense. It was an object of trust and faith. To use it for treasonous plots was a deep subversion of its purpose. It also allowed a queen to work on her codes in plain sight. She could sit in her chapel, surrounded by her court, and appear to be in deep meditation. In reality, she could be composing a message that would change the course of a war, using the very words of the holy text as a smokescreen for her deadly serious work. The prayer book was her shield and her sword hidden within the guise of faith. Number 16, how could music carry a coded message? A sheet of music could be more than just a song, it could be a battle plan. In courts where music was a constant presence, from grand balls to private recitals, the notes on a page offered a unique and elegant way to hide secret information. For a musically inclined queen, this was a natural and powerful method of communication. One of the most basic musical ciphers involved assigning letters of the alphabet to the notes on the scale. For example, A could be C, B could be D, C could be E, and so on. A simple melody could then be composed where the sequence of notes spelled out a message. A simple tune played by a court musician could secretly be saying, "The king is in danger." The beauty of this was that the music could be performed openly. Spies could listen to the concert, hear the tune, but unless they had the key to which note represented which letter, it would remain just a piece of music. A more complex version used the notes themselves as a key. This is similar to a book cipher, but uses a piece of music instead of a book. The sender and receiver would have identical copies of a specific musical score. A coded message might look like 3.21, meaning the third page, the second staff, the first note. That note, perhaps a G, would be the first letter of the secret message. A long string of these numbers could transmit a detailed message, completely hidden within the structure of a sonata or a concerto. Some codes were even more subtle. They did not hide a message in the notes themselves, but in the performance. A queen could arrange with her court composer a set of secret signals. A piece played slightly faster than usual could be a sign of urgency. A specific chord played with emphasis could mean eyes. A deliberate mistake, a sour note played in an otherwise perfect performance, could be a prearranged signal for danger or the plan has been compromised. This was a fleeting, ephemeral code. Once the music ended, the message was gone, leaving no trace. This method was particularly useful for queens who were held under guard or in isolation. A friendly guard could be instructed to listen for a specific tune played on a clavichord from the queen's chambers. A simple folk song might mean all is well. A somber dirge could mean I am in despair. It was a way to communicate her state of mind, her hopes and fears, to the outside world using a language that her captors would likely dismiss as a simple pastime. The use of music as code also played on the cultural expectations of women. A queen was expected to appreciate the arts. Her interest in music would be seen as a feminine accomplishment, not a threat, while her male counterparts were training with swords and studying maps. She could be studying a musical score, her mind engaged in a different kind of warfare. The lilting notes floating from her window were not just entertainment, they were dispatches from a hidden front line, a secret symphony of intrigue and rebellion. Number 15 was a queen's embroidery, a secret map. A piece of embroidery, seemingly a harmless and domestic pastime, could hold the secrets of a nation. For centuries, needlework was one of the few creative outlets available to highborn women. They spent countless hours stitching elaborate tapestries, chair covers, and clothing. This perception of embroidery as women's work made it the perfect vehicle for espionage. Men, especially soldiers and spy masters, would rarely give a piece of sewing a second glance. Queens and their ladies-in-waiting could embed codes in their needlework in several ways. The simplest was through color. A queen could develop a color-based alphabet with a trusted correspondent. A blue thread could represent the letter A, red thread B, a green thread C, and so on. A seemingly random pattern of small stitches in a larger design could spell out a message. A row of tiny blue, gold, and purple flowers on the hem of a dress might look decorative, but it could secretly spell H-E-L-P. The symbolism was another powerful tool. A stitched crown could represent the king, a lion might stand for England, a fleur-de-lis for France. A ship could represent an approaching fleet. A tapestry depicting a hunting scene was not just a picture. The number of dogs could represent the size of an army. The direction the deer was running could indicate the planned direction of an attack. A small, almost unnoticeable broken arrow in the corner could be a signal of defeat or a warning of a failed plot. Even the type of stitch could be part of the code. A cross stitch might mean one thing, while a chain stitch could mean another. A section of the embroidery done with a slightly different knot could be a way to highlight a specific part of the coded message. These were details that only a fellow needleworker would ever notice. An interrogator looking for a hidden message would unroll a scroll or open a book. They would not think to examine the stitching on a cushion. This method was slow and laborious. It was not for urgent messages. But it was perfect for smuggling out detailed information like maps. A queen could embroider a map of a castle's layout onto a handkerchief. The lines of the hallways would be hidden in the veins of a leaf. The location of the guards' barracks could be a cluster of French knots. The finished product would look like a lovely personal item, a gift for a friend, but it was in fact a detailed piece of military intelligence. The Bayeux's tapestry, which depicts the Norman conquest of England, is a famous example of storytelling through needlework, though not strictly a code. It shows how complex narratives could be captured in thread. For a queen under lock and key, her embroidery was her diary, her newspaper, and her carrier pigeon all in one. It was a silent, patient form of rebellion. Each stitch was an act of defiance, a secret word woven into a prison of domesticity. It was a way of speaking when she had been commanded to be silent. Number 14. How did a deck of cards spell treason? A simple deck of playing cards could be used to plan a revolution. In the hands of a clever queen, a game of solitaire was not a way to pass the time, it was a way to draft a secret message. Cards, with their combination of suits, numbers, and face cards, provided a rich vocabulary for a creative cryptographer. A common method was to agree on a specific order for the entire deck of 52 cards. This pre-arranged sequence was the key. Both the queen and her correspondent would have a list of this order. For example, the ace of spades could be A, the king of hearts could be B, the seven of clubs could be C, and so on. To write a message, the queen would simply arrange the cards in the correct sequence. She would then make a tiny, almost invisible mark on the back of each card, a small pinprick or a faint pencil dot, to indicate its order in the message. The deck would then be sent. To anyone else, it was just a deck of cards. But her ally would know to arrange them in order of the marks, and then use the master list to read the message. Another, more complex system used the cards themselves as a key for a cipher. This is known as a running key cipher. The queen and her correspondent would agree on a secret sequence of 26 cards. Each card would be assigned a numerical value: Acioni, Tutu, Jack 11, Queen 12, King 13. To encrypt a message, she would write her plain text. Below it, she would write out the letters corresponding to the sequence of cards. Then, using a cipher grid like a Vigenère square, she would combine the plain text letter with the key letter to get the cipher text. The deck of cards acted as a portable, easily disguised key. The suits could also be used to convey information. Hearts could represent friends or allies. Diamonds could signify money or resources. Clubs could mean an attack or a conflict. Spades could be a warning of danger or death. A sequence of cards laid out on a table during a seemingly innocent game could communicate a complex situation report to a co-conspirator sitting across from her. Queen of hearts, 10 of diamonds, king of clubs could translate to the queen has the money for the attack. This method was brilliant because playing cards were everywhere. They were a common and socially acceptable form of entertainment. Guards would think nothing of a queen playing a card game to alleviate her boredom. They were easy to obtain and just as easy to destroy. If she feared a search of her rooms, a queen could simply toss the incriminating deck into the fire, destroying the evidence in seconds. The system was not without its risks. If the secret sequence of cards the key was ever captured, all past and future messages would be compromised. But the physical nature of the cards made them a powerful tool. A letter is obviously a communication. A deck of cards is a toy. That assumption was the core of its strength. It allowed queens to hide their most dangerous secrets in the one thing no one would ever take seriously again. Number 13, what did a queen's shopping list really mean? A queen's request for silk, sugar, and wine could be a coded order for soldiers, supplies, and weapons. The mundane, everyday documents of court life provided a perfect cover for secret communications. A list of household expenses, a menu for a state dinner, or a request for new fabrics could all contain a hidden layer of meaning. This type of code is a form of steganography, the art of hiding a message in something that does not appear to be a message. The key was to create a secret dictionary of terms. A queen and her allies would agree on a set of code words. For example, silk might mean infantry, velvet could mean cavalry. The colors would add another layer of detail. Red silk might specify the Queen's Royal Guard. Blue velvet could refer to allied horsemen from a specific region. Numbers were crucial. A request for 10 yards of red silk would be understood by her general as a need for 10 companies of the Queen's Royal Guard. A dinner menu could list 5 roasted swans, signaling a need for 5 cannons. A request to the royal treasurer for 200 gold coins for a new gown could be a secret order to release 200 rifles from the armory. The beauty of this system was its subtlety. These documents were expected. A queen's household was a massive operation, and its management required constant communication about supplies and logistics. These papers would be flying around the castle constantly. An enemy spy who intercepted a laundry list or a request for spices would likely discard it as useless information. They were looking for letters with formal ciphers, not a note about how much sugar was needed for the royal kitchen. This method could also be used to convey information about the enemy. A queen held captive might be allowed to write letters concerning the management of her distant estates. In a letter discussing her farm, she could write, "The north pasture is overrun with 20 wolves." Her allies would understand this to mean the north gate is defended by 20 guards. A comment like, "The grain harvest has been poor," could be a secret warning that our food supplies are running low. To make the code more secure, a null system could be employed. Most of the items on the list would be genuine, meaningless requests. Only specific items, perhaps every third item on the list, or only items beginning with the letter S, would be part of the code. This made it much harder for an enemy to detect a pattern. The real message was buried in a sea of mundane, plausible information. This was a code born of necessity and domesticity. It weaponized the very world that was meant to confine the queen. Her role as a manager of the household, something often seen as secondary to the important work of men, became her greatest cryptographic asset. Her enemies expected her to be concerned with dresses and dinners. She used those very expectations to her advantage, orchestrating military and political maneuvers with the stroke of a pen on a simple shopping list. Number 12. Could you trust a messenger who didn't know the message? One of the greatest risks in sending a coded letter was the messenger. If captured, a messenger could be forced to reveal the letter's destination, its sender, and any verbal instructions they were given. A clever queen understood that the most secure messenger was one who was completely ignorant of the true nature of their task. They were a human envelope and nothing more. Queens used several techniques to ensure their messengers were unwitting participants in their schemes. One common method was to embed a secret message on an object the messenger was carrying. For example, a tiny message, written on a scrap of paper, could be rolled up tightly and pushed inside a hollowed-out quill pen. The messenger would be given the pen as a simple gift for a relative in another town. They would have no idea they were carrying a state secret. Another method involved the messenger's clothing. A message could be written on a small piece of silk and then sewn into the lining of a coat or the hem of a dress. The messenger, often a simple peasant or a merchant traveling on legitimate business, would be paid to deliver the garment. They would believe their job was simply to transport a piece of clothing. They were not told of its hidden contents, so they could not reveal them. Even food could be used. A secret note could be baked inside a loaf of bread or hidden within a wheel of cheese. The messenger's task was to deliver fresh provisions, a common and unremarkable event. They would be instructed to deliver the food to a specific person and to make sure that person received it whole. The recipient would know to break open the bread or cut the cheese to find the real delivery. This use of unwitting messengers also provided a queen with plausible deniability. If the message was discovered, she could claim the messenger acted alone. She could feign shock and horror that a trusted servant or a simple merchant would engage in such treason. It was difficult to prove the queen's involvement if the messenger themselves could not testify against her. Some queens took this a step further by using a chain of messengers. Messenger A would be told to take a package to a tavern in the next village and leave it with the innkeeper. Messenger B, a regular at that tavern, would be told a friend had left a package for them. They would then be instructed to take it to a market 2 towns away and give it to a specific stall owner. This process could be repeated several times. Each person in the chain only knew their small part of the journey. No single person knew the original sender or the final destination. This made the message incredibly difficult to trace back to its source. This system required a high degree of organization and a network of trusted contacts, but it was one of the most secure ways to move sensitive information. It was a cold and calculating method. It treated people as objects, as mere tools in a larger game, but for a queen whose survival depended on secrecy, sentimentality was a luxury she could not afford. The safest messenger was one who knew nothing. Number 11. Why was invisible ink a queen's best friend? A blank piece of paper could be a declaration of war. What appeared to be a friendly, personal letter could contain a hidden, treacherous message written between the lines. Invisible ink was a cornerstone of royal espionage for centuries. It was a simple technology, but in the right hands, it was devastatingly effective. The most common form of invisible ink was made from organic substances. Lemon juice was a popular choice. A queen would use a quill pen to write her secret message on a piece of paper using the juice. When it dried, it would be completely invisible. She could then use regular ink to write a harmless cover letter on the same piece of paper. A letter to her mother discussing her health or the weather. The paper would be sent. If intercepted, her enemies would read the mundane letter and likely think nothing more of it. The recipient, however, would know the secret. They would take the letter and gently heat it over a candle or a warm fire. The heat would cause the dried lemon juice to oxidize and darken, turning a brownish color and revealing the hidden message. Milk and vinegar worked in a similar way. They were all substances that were readily available in a royal household and would not arouse suspicion. More sophisticated chemical methods also existed. One recipe involved mixing alum, a chemical used in dyeing, with water. The writing would be invisible until the paper was brushed with a solution of water and iron sulfate. The chemical reaction would make the secret text appear. This was more secure than the heat-based method because the message would not appear by accident. It required a specific developer chemical, the knowledge of which could be kept to a very small group of people. Invisible ink was often used to add a secret layer to an already coded message. A queen might send a letter written in a simple substitution cipher. Her enemies might intercept it, and after some work manage to break the cipher, they would feel proud of their achievement and believe they had uncovered her plot. But the real, more important message could be written in invisible ink on the same page. The cipher was just a decoy designed to distract the code breakers and make them think their work was done. This technique allowed a queen to maintain multiple levels of secrecy. The existence of the message was a secret. The content of the message was a secret. And sometimes the secret message itself was a key to another, more complex cipher. For example, the invisible message might be a single word, like victory. This word would then be the keyword needed to decrypt a different letter that had been sent separately. Using invisible ink was an act of faith. The queen had to trust that her correspondent would know to look for a hidden message and would know how to reveal it. She also had to trust that the letter would not be accidentally exposed to a source of heat during its journey. But the reward was worth the risk. It allowed for a level of communication that was almost impossible to intercept. It turned a blank space, a void, into a channel for her most dangerous secrets. The empty parts of the page were where the real conversation happened. Number 10. How did Catherine de' Medici juggle so many secrets? Catherine de' Medici, the queen consort of France, and later its regent operated one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks of the 16th century. She was not just a user of code, she was a master of them. In a court torn apart by religious wars and political backstabbing, her survival depended on knowing more than her enemies. She did this by using a system of interlocking ciphers, each one tailored to the recipient. Catherine did not rely on a single cipher. That would have been too risky. If one code was broken, her entire network would be compromised. Instead, she maintained dozens of different ciphers simultaneously. Her ambassador in Spain would have one key. Her general in the south of France would have another. Her spies in the English court would have a third. This compartmentalization was a key element of her security. Her primary tool was the nomenclator. This was more than a simple substitution cipher. A nomenclator was a codebook, a list that contained symbols for individual letters, common words, and the names of important people. For example, the letter A might be represented by the symbol 7, the letter B by G, but the word B might be the symbol 7. The word attack could be 99, and the King of Spain might be represented by a small drawing of a triangle. This made the code much harder to break using frequency analysis. A code breaker could count the symbols, but the frequency of letters would be distorted by the symbols for common words. Catherine's nomenclators were extensive. Some contained hundreds of entries. She also included nulls, or meaningless symbols, which were sprinkled throughout the message to further confuse anyone trying to break it. A message might contain a dozen symbols that meant absolutely nothing, designed only to frustrate and mislead the enemy. She would often write her letters in a mix of plain text and code. A sentence might begin with a normal greeting, then switch to a string of symbols for the important information, and end with a normal, friendly closing. This was a clever psychological trick. It made the letter feel more personal and less like a dry, coded dispatch, potentially lulling an interceptor into a false sense of security. Catherine's personal touch was her use of what historians call a maternal tone in her letters, even those containing ruthless political instructions. She would address powerful men with affectionate, motherly language, all while giving them coded orders that could lead to war or peace. This dissonance between the overt tone and the covert message was part of her personal brand of power. She also had a legendary group of female spies known as her Flying Squadron. These women, ladies of the court, would use their charm and intelligence to gather information from powerful men. The information they gathered would then be relayed to Catherine, often in coded messages. Catherine de' Medici's approach to cryptography was like her approach to politics, complex, multi-layered, and built on a foundation of mistrust. She assumed every letter would be read by her enemies, so she built systems that were designed to withstand that scrutiny. She was not just sending messages, she was waging a war of information, and her ciphers were her most effective weapons. Number 9, could a grid of letters decide a battle? A simple square of letters known as a polybius square was an ancient Greek invention that found new life in the hands of medieval and Renaissance queens. It was a straightforward way to turn letters into numbers, making them easier to hide or transmit. Its power lay in its ability to convert text into a different format, one that could be sent using signals like flashes of light or taps on a wall. The standard polybius square is a 5x5 grid. The letters of the alphabet are placed inside it. Since there are 26 letters and only 25 spaces, the letters I and J are usually combined in a single square. The rows and columns are then numbered from 1 to 5. To encrypt a letter, you simply find it in the grid and replace it with its coordinates, with the row number first, then the column number. For example, if A is in the top left corner, its coordinates would be 11. The letter P might be 35. The word queen would become 41, 51, 15, 15, 33. A queen could use this simple numerical output in many ways. She could send it as a string of numbers in a letter. To an outsider, it would look like a financial accounting or a list of dates. She could also use it for signaling over a distance. Trapped in a tower, she could use a mirror to flash sunlight. The number of flashes in the first sequence would be the row number, and the number in the second sequence would be the column number. So, to send the letter A, 11, She would flash once, pause, and then flash once again. This was a slow process, but for a prisoner, it was a potential lifeline. The security of the basic Polybius square was low. Like any simple substitution cipher, it was vulnerable to frequency analysis. The number pair, 15, representing E, would appear far more often than the pair for Z's. To combat this, clever users would add a second layer of encryption. One way was to use a keyword. A queen and her correspondent would agree on a secret word, for example, loyalty. They would write the letters of the keyword first in the grid without repeating any letters, and then fill the rest of the grid with the remaining letters of the alphabet. This would scramble the grid, so might no longer be 11. Without knowing the keyword, it would be much harder to reconstruct the grid. Another advanced technique was to use the numerical output as an intermediate step. After converting queen to 41, 51, 15, 15, 33, she could then perform a mathematical operation on this string of numbers, such as adding a secret key number to each pair. If the key was 21, the new message would be 62, 72, 36, 36, 54. This added a layer of confusion that would stump a casual codebreaker. The Polybius square was a versatile tool. It was more than just a code, it was a system for converting information from one form to another. For a queen, this was invaluable. It allowed her to adapt her secret communications to the situation. A written message for a trusted courier. A series of taps on a pipe for a fellow prisoner. A pattern of knots in a rope for a rescuer. The simple grid of letters was a bridge between her isolated world and the help she so desperately needed. Number 8 was a queen's personal seal, her most vulnerable secret. A queen's seal, the unique stamp used to close her letters with a pool of wax, was her signature and her security. A letter with an unbroken seal was considered authentic and unread. Breaking a seal was a serious crime. But for spies and spy masters, breaking and recreating seals was a routine part of the job. A compromised seal meant a queen's most secret thoughts could be read, copied, and then sent on their way, with the recipient never knowing the letter had been tampered with. The art of surreptitiously opening a sealed letter was well developed. One method was to use a fine heated wire or a thin blade. This would be carefully inserted under the wax seal to melt the wax just enough to allow the letter to be opened. After the contents were read or copied, the letter would be refolded and a hot tool would be used to reseal the original wax, leaving it looking undisturbed. Another technique involved creating a forgery of the seal itself. A spy who got a brief look at an authentic seal could try to carve a copy from a piece of metal or wood. A more effective method was to take an impression of a real seal. If a spy could get their hands on a sealed letter, even for a moment, they could press the wax seal into a soft material like clay or bread dough. This would create a perfect mold. They could then use this mold to cast a replica of the queen's seal in lead or another metal. With a forged seal, a spy's power was immense. They could intercept a letter, open it, read it, and then reseal it with the forged stamp. The recipient would receive the letter with what appeared to be a perfect seal and have no reason to suspect it had been compromised. This led to a cat-and-mouse game between the letter writers and the spies. Queens began to add secret marks to their seals. A tiny scratch on the ring, a specific imperfection in the design, known only to her and her correspondent. When the recipient received the letter, they would examine the seal closely. If the secret mark was missing, they would know the seal was a forgery and the letter had been read. Another security measure was to embed a piece of thread or a single human hair into the wax. The queen would lay the thread across the folded paper before pressing the hot wax onto it. The ends of the thread would be trapped under the seal. It was almost impossible to open the letter without breaking this thread. A spy could not simply melt and reseal the wax. They would have to somehow replace the thread perfectly, which was a very difficult task. The seal was the first line of defense. A strong cipher was crucial, but if the enemy could read the letter and the recipient did not know it had been read, the damage could be catastrophic. The enemy could allow the letter to proceed, to watch the trap being set, and to spring it at the most opportune moment. A queen's trust in her seal was absolute. Its betrayal was one of the most insidious and effective tools of her enemies. It turned her own signature, her symbol of authority, into a weapon against her. Number 7. How did a simple wheel change cryptography forever? A device made of 2 rotating wheels, one slightly smaller than the other and mounted on top, became one of the most significant advances in cryptography. This was the cipher disk invented by the Italian architect and scholar Leon Battista Alberti in the 15th century. It was the first device to easily produce a polyalphabetic cipher, a code that was vastly more secure than the simple substitution ciphers that had been used for centuries. The cipher disk consisted of a larger stationary outer ring with the letters of the alphabet written in their normal order. The smaller inner disk also had the letters of the alphabet, but they were in a scrambled random order. This inner disk could be rotated. To use the disk, the sender and receiver would first have to agree on a key. The key would be a letter on the outer ring. For example, they might agree the key letter is G. The sender would rotate the inner disk so that a specific letter on it, sake, lined up with the G on the outer ring. This was the starting position. To encrypt the message, the sender would find the first letter of their plain text on the outer ring. Let's say the first word is attack. They would find A on the outer ring and look at the corresponding letter on the inner ring, which might beep. So, A becomes P. Here is where the genius of the device comes in. After encrypting a few letters, the sender would rotate the inner disk to a new position. They might have a rule, like spin the disk 3 positions to the right after every word. This meant that the next time the letter appeared in the message, it would not be encrypted as pen. It would be something different. This was a polyalphabetic cipher. The same letter in the plaintext would be represented by different letters in the ciphertext. This completely defeated frequency analysis. A codebreaker could count all the letters in the secret message, but the frequencies would be flat and random. There would be no obvious spike for the letter E. A queen using a cipher disk had a powerful advantage. The disk was portable and easy to use. She could carry it with her, disguised as a medallion or a brooch. She could change the key for every single message if she wanted to. She could send a letter to her general with one key and a letter to her ambassador with a completely different key, all using the same simple device. The security of the system depended on keeping the key in the scrambled alphabet on the inner disk a secret. But even if an enemy captured the disk, they would still need to know the key letter and the rule for when to rotate the disk to read the message. The cipher disk represented a major leap forward. It moved cryptography from a static, one-to-one system to a dynamic, evolving one. For a queen, it meant her words were no longer locked in a simple box, but in a constantly changing puzzle. It was a mechanism that introduced complexity and randomness. 2 things that are the enemies of the codebreaker and the best friends of a queen, with secrets to keep. Number 6, could a misspelled word be a deliberate clue? A letter filled with grammatical errors and spelling mistakes might not be the work of an uneducated writer. It could be a sophisticated, coded message hiding in plain sight. This method, sometimes called a null cipher, is a form of steganography, where the real message is hidden within what appears to be normal, albeit poorly written text. The vast majority of the words are meaningless. They are the ulls that serve as camouflage. There are several ways to construct a null cipher. One of the simplest is to hide the message in the first letter of each word. The sentence, "My dearest mother, I am safe. Please tell Auntie regards," seems innocuous. But if you take the first letter of each word, you get the message Meastar. This is gibberish. The sender and receiver must have a prearranged plan. For example, the real message might be in the first letter of every third word. Using that rule on the same sentence, we get IPR, which is still not very clear. A more effective method is to create a more natural sounding cover text. The writer would compose their secret message first, for example, send help. And then they would write a longer, harmless letter, carefully crafting the sentences so that the required letters appear in the correct order. For example, the message might be hidden as the third letter of every 5th word. The challenge was to make the cover text sound natural and not forced. A strange or stilted sentence could alert a suspicious reader that something was amiss. Another variation was to use deliberate misspellings. A queen could agree with her correspondent that any misspelled word in her letter was a signal. The first letter of each misspelled word, when read in order, would form the secret message. A letter might read, "I received your lovely gift. The weather here is fine. I hope you are well. My health is good." The misspelled words are lovely, weather, well, and health. Taking the first letter of each gives LWWH, which could be a code for a person or a place. This type of code was psychologically powerful. It preyed on the assumptions of the reader. An educated person, a spy master, reading a letter full of errors from a queen would likely assume the queen was trying to appear unthreatening or was simply a poor writer. They might dismiss the letter as unimportant. The idea that the errors themselves were the message was counterintuitive. The main weakness of the null cipher was the risk of the cover text sounding unnatural. It took great skill to weave a secret message into a longer text without creating awkward phrasing. But when done well, it was extremely effective. No special equipment was needed, no complex mathematics. All that was required was a sharp mind and a shared secret. For a queen under observation, whose every polished and formal letter was scrutinized, sending a clumsy error-filled note could be the cleverest trick of all. It used the mask of incompetence to hide a sharp and dangerous mind. Number 5 was Marie Antoinette's code too simple to succeed. And Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the Revolution, relied on a sophisticated cipher to communicate with her allies, particularly the Swedish Count Axel von Fersen, as she and her family were imprisoned. The cipher they used was a variation of the Vigenère cipher, a method so powerful for its time that it was known as le chiffrage indéchiffrable, the indecipherable cipher, and yet it failed her. The Vigenère cipher is a polyalphabetic cipher, much like the one produced by a cipher disk, but it uses a keyword instead of a mechanical device. It works with a grid of alphabets known as a Vigenère square or a tabula recta. The first row of the grid is the standard alphabet. The second row is shifted one position to the left, starting with B. The third row starts with key, and so on for 26 rows. To encrypt a message, you need a keyword. Let's say the keyword is king. You write your message, for example, meet at dawn. You then write the keyword repeatedly above the message king, K-I-N-G, meet at dawn. Now, you use the grid. For the first letter, lem, you go to the row that starts with ka from the keyword. You find the column for lem. The letter where the K row and M column intersect is your ciphertext letter. You repeat this for every letter. E is encrypted using the key letter I. The next E is encrypted using N. The T is encrypted using G. Because the keyword is repeated, the same plaintext letter will be encrypted differently depending on its position. This thwarts frequency analysis. Marie Antoinette and Fersen used this system, but with a nomenclator component. They added a list of code numbers for important people and places. The king might be 19, the queen might be 20, and Paris might be 46. Their letters were a mix of Vigenère encrypted text and these code numbers. This should have been incredibly secure. The problem was twofold. First, human error. To be truly secure, the keyword should be long and random. They likely used a word or phrase that was meaningful to them, which could potentially be guessed. More importantly, they were not always rigorous in their application of the cipher. They sometimes grew lazy and would write sensitive words in plain text in the middle of a coded letter. Words like king or safety appearing in the clear could give a codebreaker a massive clue, a way to pry open the rest of the message. The second problem was a brilliant and patient codebreaker. While the French revolutionaries struggled to decipher the letters initially, the messages were eventually broken. In fact, some of the most intimate and politically damaging sections of the letters were only fully deciphered in the 21st century using advanced scientific analysis. Researchers discovered that Fersen had written over some of Marie Antoinette's words, redacting them himself. By using advanced X-ray scanning, they were able to read the original words beneath his scribbles, revealing the depth of their personal relationship and the details of their political plotting. Marie Antoinette's code was not too simple. In fact, it was one of the strongest of its era. Her failure was not in the cipher itself, but in the inconsistent and sometimes emotional way it was used. In the cold world of cryptography, a moment of haste or a lapse in discipline can be fatal. Her story is a stark example that the strength of a code is only as good as the diligence of the person using it. Number 4, how did a queen use her own jailer as a postman? Mary, Queen of Scots, spent nearly 2 decades imprisoned by her cousin Queen Elizabeth I of England. During this time, she was the center of numerous plots to depose Elizabeth and place Mary, a Catholic, on the English throne. To communicate with her co-conspirators, she needed a secret and reliable way to get letters out of her heavily guarded prison. She found one in the most unlikely of places, the local brewery. Mary was held at Chartley Hall, a moated manor house. A local brewer was given a contract to supply the household with beer each week. This brewer became the crucial link in her secret communication chain. A plan was devised where Mary's secret letters would be hidden in a hollowed-out, watertight container. This container would then be placed in the bung, or stopper, of one of the beer barrels being delivered to Chartley. A servant inside the household, loyal to Mary, would receive the delivery, retrieve the container from the barrel, and pass the letters to the Queen. When Mary had written her replies, the process would be reversed. The letters would be placed back in the container, put into the bung of an empty barrel, and taken away by the brewer on his next trip. The brewer would then pass the letters on to Mary's supporters on the outside. Mary believed this system was foolproof. The guards at Chartley searched her rooms and her visitors, but they paid little attention to the weekly beer delivery. It was a mundane, routine event. The brewer was a local tradesman, not an obvious conspirator. For a time, the system worked perfectly. A steady stream of secret correspondence flowed in and out of Mary's prison. What Mary did not know was that her entire network was a trap. During Queen Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had discovered the plot. He had turned the brewer, who was now working as a double agent. Every single letter that went in or out of the beer barrels was being intercepted by Walsingham's men. Walsingham's codebreaker, a brilliant man named Thomas Philippus, would receive the letters. He would carefully break the seal, make a copy of the coded message, and then the original letter would be resealed and sent on its way. Philippus would then decipher the copy at his leisure. This meant that Walsingham could read Mary's plans and the plans of her conspirators in real time. He knew every detail of their plotting. This setup, known as the Babington Plot, allowed Walsingham to build an ironclad case of treason against Mary. He did not just want to stop the plot, he wanted to let it develop until Mary had incriminated herself in her own handwriting. The beer barrel system, which Mary saw as her secret lifeline to freedom, was in fact the very mechanism that was tightening the noose around her neck. She had successfully turned her jail into a post office, but she was unaware that the Postmaster General was her greatest enemy. Number 3, could a dictionary be a weapon of war? A standard, everyday dictionary could be transformed into an unbreakable codebook. This method, known as a book cipher using a dictionary, was favored by those who needed a high level of security without the complexity of mathematical ciphers. All that was needed was for both the sender and receiver to have the exact same edition of the same dictionary. The system worked by replacing each word of the plaintext message with a set of 3 numbers representing the word's location in the dictionary. The first number would be the page number. The second number would be the column number, usually 1 or 2. The third number would be the word's position in that column. The 5th word from the top, the 12th word, etc. For example, to encrypt the word danger, a queen would look it up in her dictionary. She might find it on page 82 in the first column as the 15th word down. The code for danger would then be 82.1.15. To encrypt the message danger imminent, she would look up both words and send the sequence of numbers 82.1.15, 145.23. This code was exceptionally strong for several reasons. First, it was not a substitution cipher in the traditional sense. The same letter was part of thousands of different words and would be encoded differently every time. This made frequency analysis completely useless. There was no way to guess which numbers corresponded to the letter E. Second, the key was the dictionary itself. An enemy who intercepted the message 82.1.15, 145.2.3 would have no way of deciphering it without knowing which book was being used as the key. And not just which book, but which specific edition. A dictionary published in London in 1750 would have a different page layout and word order than one published in Edinburgh in 1752. Without the exact right book, the numbers were meaningless. Queens could increase the security even further. They could agree to add a certain number, a shift, to each page number. For example, they might agree on a shift of +n. So, to encode Banger on page 82, she would write 92.1.15. This meant that even if an enemy somehow captured both the message and the correct dictionary, the code would still not work unless they also knew the secret shift number. The main drawback of the dictionary cipher was that it was slow. Looking up every single word in a message took a great deal of time and patience. It was also limited by the dictionary's vocabulary. If a queen needed to use a word that was not in the dictionary, she would have to spell it out letter by letter, which was even more time-consuming. Despite its slowness, the security it offered was unparalleled for its time. It was a code that required no special skill, no mathematical genius, only a shared common object. For a queen needing to send a short but critically important message, turning a book of words into a book of secrets was a powerful and clever choice. It armed her with a weapon that her enemies would not even recognize as one. Number 2. Why did Elizabeth I trust a man named the Spy Master? When Queen Elizabeth I of England reigned for over 40 years in a time of intense political and religious turmoil. Her throne was constantly under threat from foreign powers and domestic conspiracies. Her survival and the survival of her kingdom was due in no small part to her reliance on a formidable and ruthless intelligence network run by her principal secretary, Sir Francis Walsingham. Elizabeth herself was a user of codes, but her greatest cryptographic strength was not in the codes she wrote, but in the ones her organization broke. Walsingham built a spy network that was unprecedented in its scope and sophistication. He had agents in every major court in Europe. He employed linguists, scholars, and mathematicians who were dedicated to the art of cryptanalysis. His office in London was, in effect, the world's first state-sponsored code-breaking agency. The primary targets of Walsingham's codebreakers were the supporters of Mary, Queen of Scots. They used a variety of ciphers, most commonly nomenclators, which combined a substitution alphabet with a list of code words for important names and phrases. Walsingham's team became experts at breaking these. Their primary method was frequency analysis. They would start by counting the symbols in an intercepted message. The most common symbol was likely E. They would then look for repeated patterns. A two-symbol pattern that appeared often could be the word to or in. A three-symbol pattern could be or and. It was like a complex puzzle. Each small piece they solved gave them a clue to the next. Walsingham's key codebreaker was Thomas Philippes. Philippes was a master of languages and had an incredible talent for recognizing patterns. He could look at a page of symbols and see the underlying structure of the language beneath. He was not just a codebreaker, he was also a skilled forger. This was a crucial part of Walsingham's strategy. When Walsingham's network intercepted a coded letter, Philippes would decipher it. But Walsingham would often not act on the information immediately. Instead, he would have Philippes draft a reply in the same code, mimicking the original sender's style. This reply could be used to ask for more information, to lure the conspirators into revealing more of their plans, or to give them false information. In the case of the Babington plot, Philippes deciphered a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, in which she approved of a plan to assassinate Elizabeth. This was the evidence Walsingham needed. But to make the case even stronger, Philippes added a postscript to the letter in Mary's own cipher. He forged a request from her, asking the conspirators for the names of those involved. When the conspirators replied with a list of names, they sealed their own fates and Mary's. Elizabeth's relationship with Walsingham was complex. She valued his loyalty and his results, but she was often uncomfortable with his dark methods. She called him her Moor because of his grim and serious demeanor, but she knew she needed him. Her reign was a constant battle for survival, and Walsingham was her general in a secret war of whispers and codes. Her trust in him was not about friendship. It was a pragmatic recognition that in a world of plots and secrets, the one who could read the enemy's mail was the one who would win. Number 1. Did a broken code seal Mary, Queen of Scots' fate? The execution of a queen is a momentous event. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded for treason against her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. The axe that fell on her neck was sharpened by a series of coded letters. The story of her downfall is the ultimate cautionary tale in the history of royal cryptography. It shows how a complex code, a supposedly secure communication channel, and a queen's desperate hope for freedom could be turned into a perfect, inescapable trap. Mary's primary cipher, used in her fatal correspondence with Anthony Babington, was a sophisticated nomenclator. It was not a simple A, B, C, D substitution. It consisted of a substitution alphabet for individual letters, 23 symbols for common letter combinations like ending, 35 symbols representing important people and places, and 4 nulls or meaningless symbols to confuse codebreakers. There was even a symbol that meant the following letter is a double. It was a robust and complex system. She and her supporters believed it to be unbreakable. Combined with the beer barrel smuggling system, she felt she could communicate with the outside world with impunity. She used this channel to encourage a plot led by Babington, which involved an invasion of England by Spanish forces and the assassination of Elizabeth. Every one of her letters was intercepted by Francis Walsingham's agents. They were passed to Thomas Philippus, who, despite the cipher's complexity, was able to break it. He likely started with frequency analysis to identify the symbols for common letters. He then used his knowledge of language to look for patterns. He might have guessed a 5-symbol word that appeared near a symbol he suspected was King could be Spain. By making educated guesses and testing them, he slowly unraveled the entire system. The critical piece of evidence was a letter from Mary to Babington written on July 17, 1586. In this letter, she explicitly gave her support to the assassination of Elizabeth. She wrote in her code discussing the dispatch of the usurper. When Philippus deciphered this, he knew he had her. To mark his triumph, he drew a small sketch of a gallows on the outside of the copied letter before sending it to Walsingham. At her trial, Mary initially denied writing the letters. She argued they could be forgeries. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Walsingham's team had not only her coded letters, but also the deciphered versions. They could show the direct link between her words and the plot to kill the queen. The broken code was the primary evidence against her. Without it, the case was just one person's word against another's. With it, her treason was laid bare for all to see. Mary's code was strong, but her opponents were stronger. They had a state-sponsored organization dedicated to breaking codes, and they had a genius Philippes at the helm. Mary's story is a heartbreaking lesson in the dangers of underestimating your enemy. She put her faith in a secret language, believing it would be her salvation. But in the end, her own words, translated from her secret symbols back into plain English, were what condemned her. The code that was meant to free her instead became her confession.